Hey everyone, in this video I'll be covering the basics of models in Django. So I'll start with connecting to a Postgres database. I'll create a simple model and show you how to insert, update, and delete data in that model. Then I'll create some simple relationships between multiple models, and I'll show you how that works and how to view the child information for each particular model depending on the relationship. So that's the main thing I'll cover in this video. I won't cover much about queries. I'll save that for a future video because that's its own separate topic. And a lot of the things that I cover in this video are in my Django cheat sheet. So if you want to download the cheat sheet, you can go to prettyprinted.com/Django, or you can go to the link in the description below and you can get the cheat sheet. So if you have any questions about this video, just leave a comment down below and I'll answer them. And I hope you enjoyed this video.
So I'll start by creating a new project. Let's use Django admin start project, and then we'll call this model video. And then with that, I'll cd into the model video directory, and I'll also add it to Sublime so I can see it. Okay. And now that I have that ready, what I want to do is modify the database information. So what I'll be doing in this video is similar for any database that you use. I'll just be using Postgres in particular, but if you want to continue using SQLite or instead use something like MySQL, the process will be the same other than changing the database information here. So to create a database, I have this service called Elephant SQL that I use, and I'll just simply create a new instance and give it some name. So I'll call this model video, and hopefully no one has taken that name. Okay, so the model video instance has been created. And here on this page, it just gives me the information about my database. So I'm going to put this into the Django configuration file. So the engine part is going to change from SQLite to PostgreSQL. If you were using MySQL, it would be MySQL. If you were using Oracle, it'd be Oracle, but I'm using Postgres. And if you put in the name wrong, it will tell you when you try to migrate. So keep that in mind. The name of the database is supplied by Elephant SQL. So let me get the name first. It's this thing that starts with P. It's obviously randomly generated. So I'll remove the SQLite part, and I'll add the name of the database that Elephant SQL has given me. And then I need some additional information because this database is actually hosted. It's not simply a file on my machine like SQLite. So I'll add the host. I'll add the username. I'll add the password. And I believe I just need the port after that. Okay, so the host I will copy from here. So the host is going to be this. And then the user is the same as the name of the database itself. The password is here. And then the port is 5432, which is a standard port for PostgreSQL. Okay, so before I actually migrate this database and create the default Django tables, I'm going to log into my database using pgadmin4. So create server, and basically I just need the same information that I added to Django just now. So the host, I'll just copy that again. And what I'm doing here is I'm setting this up so I can actually see what's going on in my database, so I can get a visual of it. And then the password is this here. And that should be it. The port has already been added, so I'll save. Okay, so it looks like it found my database. And since I'm using a database service, it's going to list all the other databases on the particular instance, but I only have access to the one that I created. So I just have to find the one that starts with P. I believe it's like PQ something. So here we go. It's going to be the only one that's completely highlighted. So if I open it up and look at the schemas and then the tables in the public schema, I have one table, and that's just like the default table that comes with Postgres. So now that I have all that done, took a second, but I have it done. What I want to do is I want to migrate so I can generate the default Django tables. So Python manage.py migrate. And I get an error. It's telling me that I don't have a module called PSYCOPG2, which is needed for Postgres. So I'll install that quickly. So PSYCOPG2. And once I install that and try migrating again, it should be able to migrate successfully. So I'll run migrate again. And it looks like it's working. So if you look at pgadmin, you can see the little graph in the back is doing stuff because there are actually things happening on the database. Now it's like a live view of what's going on in your database. All right, so now that this is done, I should be able to see the tables that I've created. So if I just refresh this tables part, I now see several tables here. The auth group tables, the Django tables, and so on. So I know that it's connecting to my database fine, and I can actually use my database. So next thing I'll do is I'll create an app so we can actually have an app to work on where we modify the model. So I'll do Django or Python manage.py start app, and we'll call this example. Okay, so I should have the new files here. Here we go. And I'll only be modifying one more file, and that's the models file because this video is about models, of course. So what I want to do now is I want to create a simple model. And the first model that I'm going to create is going to be a model that represents a company. So just a preview of what I'm doing is I'm going to have 3 different tables. One is a company, one is a table for programmers, and another table is for languages. And you'll see how they all connect when I get to that part. But basically the idea is that a company will have a bunch of programmers that work for it, and then programmers will have certain languages that they know. So that's basically the example that I'm using here. So I'll create the first table, and we'll call this company. And I need to inherit from models.model, capital M in the second model. And I'm going to keep the fields in the tables very simple. I don't want to cover the fields, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory, like char field, text field, integer field. If you need help with any of the fields, you can just let me know, and I can help you out with those in the comments. But for this particular video, I'll skip over the other fields because I don't want to get into what each one of them means exactly. So I'll just create a char field for the name of the company. And now that I have that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make migrations. So manage.py, then make migrations. And the reason why this didn't work is because I forgot to do one other thing, and I always forget to do this. I forgot to add the app to the settings. So if I go back up and I go to installed apps, I need to add example to the installed apps. And when I do that, then Django knows where to look for possible changes to the model. So if I run make migrations again, it gives me an error because I forgot to put models.carfield there. But now when I do it one more time, this should work. Okay, so it works and it created a migration file. So let's just take a look at that quickly. And we see it's created a model called company. The fields are ID and name. So that's exactly what I wanted to create. So now what I'll do is I'll actually migrate this. And once I do, I'll take a look at Postgres. I'll refresh this and I'll look for the company table that I just created. So here it says example underscore company, and that's what I'm looking for. So the way that Django names your tables by default in your database is by using the name of your app first, followed by an underscore, followed by the name of the model that you use. So in this case, it's example underscore company. So now that I have that, let me go ahead and actually add some information to this table, and you'll see that it's pretty easy. So I'm going to use the Django shell for this. So manage.py and then shell. So what this shell allows you to do, this interactive console, it allows you to interact with specific parts of your code without actually running your app. So it makes it easy to debug things, and it makes it easier to test things through this console than running your app completely and going through the process to test it. With the shell, you can just test something directly. And in this particular case, I want to test adding things to the database. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import from my example app and get the models from the example app. So just know that the root of this shell is kind of in your project directory. So if I go model video, then where you have manage, that's where the shell is placed. So if I want to get what's in the example, I have to say from example, and then I have to give the module, which is models, and I can import company. And if everything works there, then I know I've imported company correctly. So now what I want to do is I want to create some companies. So this is the first major thing that I want to cover, how to add data into the database once you have a model. To do that, you simply instantiate the class with all the field names or the fields that you have for that particular class. So in this case, I only have name, but if you had like name, dates, location, etc., then you would add those as well when you instantiate. So I'm going to add a few companies here. The first company I'll add is Google. So company name Google. And then let's use Apple, company name Apple. Microsoft, company name Microsoft. And finally, let's use Facebook. Okay, so like I said, if you had other fields like address, you add it here with the equal, but I don't have that. I only have name, just to keep things simple. And now that I have that, I don't actually have the information stored in the database yet. So if I look at the data for example company, and when it loads, this app is pretty slow, but when it loads, I see I have nothing here. I see the two columns that I have. I have an ID column and I have a name column, but I don't see the data that I want. And to actually see the data in the database, to actually save it to the database in a sense, all I have to do is call the save method on each one of those objects that I created. So if I type google.save, it will save that to the database. So it's inserting a row into the database. So if I run the query again, I see an ID of 1 and a name of Google. So I'll just do the same thing for the other ones that I have. And Microsoft, save, and Facebook, save. So now when I run this again, I see the 4 companies that I added there. So as you can see, adding rows into the database is very, very easy. And even though I'm using the shell here, you would use the same process when you're writing out your code in the source files. So, if you wanted to create a new row after something happened, you would instantiate that class, and then you would call save on the object that you created from that class. So fairly straightforward. Now let's say that I want to modify one of these. So typically, any table you have in a database will have multiple columns. In my case, I only have 2 because I'm keeping it simple. So I'll have to modify the name. Let's say I wanted to change the name of one of the companies. So starting with the object that I have, and later I'll show you how to get this object if you don't have it already. But if I wanted to start with an object, let's say Google, and I wanted to change the name of it, I would call google.name. So the attribute that I want to change is the name. And if I update it, I can say something like alphabet. And then to commit this update of the name to the database, I would call google.save again. And even though the object name in Python is Google, that's just the name that I gave the variable in a sense in Python. But the name alphabet is what's actually being stored in the database after I save. So if I run this again, we see that the name on number 1 has changed from Google to alphabet. And if I wanted to change it back, I could. Now, if I wanted to remove one, that's also pretty simple. Let's say I wanted to remove Facebook. All I have to do is call the delete method on Facebook. So facebook.delete, hit enter, and I get a result back. It tells me exactly what I deleted and how many I deleted. And if I refresh the database, I now only have 3 columns or 3 rows for this particular table because Facebook is no longer there. So what I'll do next is I'll exit out of the shell and I'll go back into it. So I no longer have access like Google and Microsoft. And I just want to show you how to get access to those in a pretty simple way. I'm not covering queries in this video. I'll cover them in a future video, maybe even the next video. So I'll show you probably the simplest query there is to get a row in the database. So first I need to import from example.models again, import company. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a particular company. So let's say I wanted Apple, which is ID number 2. All I would have to do is assign the results to some variable. So let's call this Apple again. And then I'm going to run company.objects.get. And then inside of get, the parameter is going to be PK, short for primary key. And then I need to give it the ID that the primary key is in this case. And that's number 2 for Apple. So if I hit 2 there, and now if I type Apple, I see company object 2. And I don't have the stir representation of this. Let me go ahead and add that really quick. So I'll close out the migration file. And this is just to give it some representation. So it just returns self name. That should return. Okay, so I'll go back to the shell. And I have access to Apple again. So if I wanted to update the name, so apple.name equals Apple, all uppercase, and then apple.save. And then looking at the database, perform the query again, I see that Apple is all caps now. So that's the first part that I wanted to show you how to do, is basically inserting, updating, and deleting data from a database, because that is probably the most common thing that you'll be doing, other than queries, of course. But manipulating data, so adding, updating, deleting, and queries are pretty much the two things that you do all the time. So now that I have this simple table, now what I want to do is I want to focus on relationships. So that's where the power of SQL comes in. You can have relationships between tables. And the relationship that I'll create here is a relationship between companies and the programmers who work for that company. So programmers will work for, let's just say, one company for the purposes of this video. Of course, they could work for more than one at the same time, but let's just say that they can only work for one. So I'll create a new class called programmer, models, model. And now what I'll do is I'll create a name for the programmer. So it's going to be the same as what I have in the other one. I'll give it a max length of 20 again. And now to actually create the relationship between the programmers and the company, I'm going to add a field called company. So this is going to be pointing to the company class that I have here. Then I'll use models, and then I'll use foreign key. And all I need to pass the foreign key is the class that the foreign key should reference. And then Django is going to figure out everything else for me. So basically what I'm saying here is that a programmer belongs to a certain company, and that company is represented in the company table. So if I simply return name for stir, I can get to the part where I can actually add programmers. So since I created this new model, what has to happen is I need to make migrations. So Python manage make migrations first. And I'm missing one thing. So here on the foreign key, it actually takes two things, not just one, but something called on delete. And what this means is when you delete, let's say, the company, then it needs to cascade and delete the programmer as well, or at least that's what I'm specifying. So models and then cascade in all caps because it's a constant. So let's say someone is working for Apple and then Apple gets deleted from your database, then that reference in each of the programmer's columns needs to be removed as well. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Like, they're working for Apple, but the Apple company no longer exists in your database. So that's basically what cascade means. So if I make migrations again, and that is because I spell cascade wrong. So cascade. All right. So let's try that one more time. Okay. So it worked that time. And if I look at the migrations file, it shows me that it's creating a new table with 3 columns, and it's pointing to the company for the foreign key column. So basically what the foreign key means is that there's a connection between the programmer table and the company table. So I can now migrate this. And it's done. So I'll take a look at the database again. So I'll refresh, and I should see a new table called example programmer, and I do. There won't be any data in it, of course, because I haven't added any. So I'll start up the shell again. And in the shell, what I'll do is from example.models, import programmer, and I want to import company as well. So now let me create some programmers. Let's say Anthony is going to be programmer. And before I create the programmers, let me get the companies back. So Apple is going to be number 2, I believe. So company.objects get pk equals 2. Alphabet is going to be company.objects get pk equals 1. And then Microsoft is going to be company.objects get pk equals 3. So if I look at one, I see that the company is Microsoft. Okay, so now I want to create a programmer. And the reason why I had to do that first is because I want to add a company to each programmer that I create. So we'll start with Anthony. Programmer, the name is going to be Anthony, and then I need to supply a company. And to do this, all I have to do is supply the object that I'm interested in. So let's say Apple, and that creates Anthony, and it says that Anthony works at Apple. If I create another programmer, Microsoft, and I'll create a few more programmers. And let's do one more. So let's call this programmer Steve. So name Steve, company will be Alphabet again. Okay, so I'll save all of these to the database. So everything else is the same process. And now let's see what happens. So remember the IDs for the company. So 1 is Alphabet, 2 is Apple, and 3 is Microsoft. So if I go to example programmer and then I view the data, I see the programmers that I added here. They all have primary keys, but for each programmer, it has a company ID as well. So Anthony has 2, Stacy and Kelly have 3, and then Zach and Steve have 1. So remember, 1 is for Alphabet, 3 is for Microsoft, and 2 is for Apple. And Django took care of all that for me because I simply told Django which company they worked for by just passing the object to the company when I instantiated each programmer. So as you can see, that's pretty simple. Now what I want to do is I want to determine which company someone works for. So if I looked at Anthony here, it says Anthony is a programmer. And if I type Anthony.name, that tells me Anthony's name. But if I type Anthony.company, we see company Apple because it's giving me the object for that particular company. If I do Steve company, I get Alphabet, and Kelly company, I see Microsoft. So because I have that relationship, I'm able to go in that direction. So basically, starting from a programmer, I'm able to determine which company that programmer works for. Well, what if I wanted to know the opposite? What if I wanted to know all the programmers that work for a certain company? So I can actually do that as well. So if I look at Microsoft, I can see something like Microsoft.name. but there's no thing for Microsoft like programmers. I get an error. So to actually do that, I will call Microsoft and then programmer and then underscore set. And what this is going to do is it's going to give me access to all the programmers that belong to the company. So it's basically just going in reverse. So Django is adding that column automatically for me, or it's like a pseudo column. So basically what it's doing is it's taking the name of the class and then appending underscore set to it, and then that will give me access to it. So if I do that, it gives me this weird description, but if I type .all after it, it then gives me all the programmers that belong to that particular company. So looking at Microsoft, I see the two programmers there are Stacy and Kelly. And if I looked at Apple, programmer set all, shows me Anthony. And then if I do the same thing for Alphabet, that programmer underscore set all, I see Zach and Steve. So as you can see, that's pretty straightforward as well. And it's nice because you really didn't have to specify that much in the model, and Django is able to give you all that extra functionality. If you were writing like raw SQL, it'd be a little more complicated, but when you're using something like Django and it's ORM, things are pretty simple for you. So now what I want to show you is I want to show you a many-to-many relationship, meaning that more than one row of a table can be contained in more than one row of another table. And to demonstrate this, I'll create a new class called language. So this is going to represent languages that programmers can know. So obviously a single programmer can know multiple languages, and each language can be known by more than one programmer. So we have a many-to-many relationship here. So if I do models.model here, and then once again, I'll keep this very simple, just add a name and give it a max length of 20. Now what I want to do is I want to represent the relationship in some way. So to do this, I will use the models.many-to-many field. But before I do that, I have to decide which one I want to put it on. And I only have to put it on one, and it will have the same effect regardless of which class I put it on. So if I put it on programmer, it will do the same thing as if I put it on language. So because it doesn't matter, what you want to focus on more is logically which makes more sense. So does it make more sense that a programmer knows many languages, or does it make more sense that a language has many programmers that use it? Obviously, they both make sense, but it makes more sense to put it on a programmer. So if I create a new field here called languages and call models.many to many field, just keep in mind that the first letter of each word has to be capitalized, so MTMF, and then I pass in the class. And because I'm referencing the language before it gets created, I have to move this language class above programmer. Okay, so now that I've created this new table, let me exit out of here and I will make migrations. And let's take a look at the migrations file. So this time it created the table, language. It tells me something about dependencies, and that's just the previous migration. And then it shows me the adding of a field to programmer. And what it's going to do is it's going to take this migration file and actually modify the database. But we'll see in just a moment that this migration is going to have a slightly different effect as the one for one-to-many relationships. Okay, so it's done now. So if I refresh the tables that I have, I should see a language table. And I do, example underscore language, but I also see another table called example underscore programmer underscore languages. And the reason why this table exists is because with many-to-many relationships, you need a third table to kind of map what goes on between the two tables. So because each programmer can know multiple languages and each language can have multiple programmers, you can't store that in one table. You have to put that in a separate table, and then each one of the language and programmer tables will stand independent, but this mapping table, as it's called, will hold the relationship. So this will make more sense once I actually run it. Or once I actually add some data into the database. So what I'll do is Python manage, and I'll run the shell again. And I'm going to get my programmers back. So first I need to import. So from example.models import programmer and language. And now what I'll do is I'll get just a couple of my programmers back. So programmer objects gets pk equals 1. And then I believe the second programmer is Stacy. So objects gets pk equals 2. So Stacy, okay, yeah, I got the name right. And Anthony. Okay, so now I want to create some new languages. And what I'll do for this is I will say, let's say Python is one language. So language name Python. And then Java, language name Java. Let's add a couple more. Java, Ruby, language name Ruby. And finally, Haskell, language name Haskell. Okay, and then I will save all these to the database. So Python save, Java save, Ruby, and Haskell. Okay, so now that I have all those saved, what I want to do now is I want to add languages onto programmers. So to do this, I can't simply say, Anthony.language equals Python, because Anthony can have more than one language. So instead, what I'm going to use is Anthony dot, and then let me look at the model. So here I have this languages. So on programmer, I have languages. So I'm going to reference languages, and then to add a language to Anthony, I use the add method, and then I can pass in the object. So Python, and then Anthony languages add Ruby. And what happens is I don't have to actually save this because it's a different type of add. So if I go to example programmer languages and view the data, I will see a couple of rows that are in there, and we'll see what's going on. So this is pretty slow, but it should be working. And while I wait, I'll add some languages to Stacy. So Stacy, let's try saving. And then all rows. Yeah, my tool is starting to give up on me. I find that pgadmin isn't the best tool on Windows. Like it has a lot of features, but it's just so slow. So I'll add languages to Stacy while I wait. So Java, and then if I can spell languages, add Haskell. Okay, so let's see if I can get my database viewer working again, or if it's given up on me. So view data opens up a new tab. Okay, that's a lot better. So now we see in this table, it has primary keys, but the most important part are the programmer IDs and the language IDs. So we see for programmer ID 1, and ID 1 is Anthony. Anthony has the languages 1 and 3. So Anthony has Python and Ruby. And then programmer ID 2, which is Stacy, has language ID 2 and 4. So that is Java and Haskell. So we see it's getting added to the database. And then in the other tables, nothing has changed. So now if I want to view the languages that a programmer has, I can simply say Anthony.languages.all. And I see Python and Ruby. I can do the same thing for Stacy. And then if I want to know which programmers know a particular language, I can do the same thing. But because I don't have it defined on the language model, Haskell or Django has generated something for me automatically. So it's similar to how I used the set before. So let's see, Python and then programmer underscore set and then all, and it returns Anthony, meaning Anthony is the only programmer that knows Python. If I were to add Stacy, so Stacy languages add Python, and then I ran that again, Python programmer set all, I see both Anthony and Stacy there. So that programmer set was added by Django, but because I have it, I'm able to see all the programmers that are in a particular language. So as you can see, the basics of using the model and just SQL in general and Django is actually pretty straightforward. And what I've demonstrated in this video covers most of what you'll be doing with the database stuff. I didn't cover queries, of course, so that's the other half. But in terms of creating things in the database, really this will get you like 90% of the way. And then the rest of the 10% depends on what your specific use case is. You may have more complicated data, but I'd say most data in a database is going to be this simple. Obviously, you'll have more fields because you'll have more information about your data, but the structure and the relationships between the data is going to be very similar to what I've done in this video. And of course, if you have any questions, like you're doing something that's a little more complicated, you can just leave a comment down below and I'll try to help you out with that. So that's all I wanted to cover in this video. I hope that with me going through this, I've helped you understand how models in Django work and how to set up databases and stuff like that, because it's something that every programmer needs to know who's using a web framework. So it's like one of the core things that you need to know. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, you can always leave a comment down below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you have subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching this video, and I will talk to you next time.